Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the fight for Libya, and indeed for its economy. There's work to do in getting Libya back on its feet, but the Transitional Council could be in an incredibly strong position. Also, as we mark World Water Week, we look at how supplying electricity to the people of East Timor is colliding with the country's underwater ecosystem. And Apple loses the apple of its eye. CEO Steve Jobs steps down, shares took a dive. What now for the world's most popular brands? But we begin in Libya this week, where after 42 years, Muammar Gaddafi's rule is considered all but over. But while the fighting does go on, the opposition National Transitional Council is taking its first steps to becoming a fully fledged government. Now, to be effective in that role, it needs money. And if things go well for the NTC, it may just have that and a whole lot more. We'll tell you about Libya's frozen assets in a moment and how unfreezing them could transform the NTC. But first, some numbers on what's been spent on this battle so far. The UK estimates that for the first 6 months to September, it'll spend £260 million or $430 million on its operations in Libya. By July 10, France, the first nation to recognise the rebels, had spent €160 million or $231 million. And the United States, by mid-May, had thrown $664 million into its operations in Libya, or put another way, $2 million a day, $60 million a month. The US was also the largest contributor to the Libyan effort, with 75 aircraft and drones conducting 75% of reconnaissance missions, more than 75% of all refueling operations, and 27% of all sorties. But there was also contributions from the Middle East. Qatar's 6 Mirage fighter jets were flying with Western powers. Qatar also helped sell Libyan oil and supplied the opposition forces with petroleum products, gas and petrol to keep the economy going. And when the Libyan rebels were desperate for cash, the sale of 1 million barrels of oil through Qatar raised almost $130 million. And the United Arab Emirates has also provided Libyan opposition forces with space to regroup. In fact, the Libyan consulate in Dubai has been flying the rebel flag for some time. So a lot of people have thrown a lot of money at the Libya situation. Now comes the time to find yet more money to rebuild the country and its economy. And Libya could just be a revelation in the region when it comes to that. Why? Because it has oil, it has no debts, and it has frozen assets all over the place, somewhere between $110 and $150 billion worth. In the US, for example, there's $37 billion. In the UK, another $20 billion. And in Germany, $7.3 billion. And there are all sorts of efforts underway right now to get that money released and into the hands of the NTC. So let's think more now about how Libya moves forward from here. We've got Syed Hirsch joining us from London, Middle East economist at Capital Economics. Syed, thank you for your time. Libya just seems to have this incredible opportunity here. There will be money available. There are the systems in place. Done right, the future's there for the taking.
Yes, absolutely. I think the first thing we need to take into account the fact that Libya is a very wealthy country in terms of its financial and its natural resources, and also starts from a position of zero debt, unlike places like Egypt, and also doesn't have institutions in place that necessarily have to be dismantled. So it starts from actually a very good position. The first challenge will be getting the security situation in place to start driving its economy.
Let's focus on some specifics now, Saeed. Oil is obviously where we start, crucial to the economy, and good quality oil, I believe it is too. I wonder though if it's too crucial, if you strip away the oil, if there's actually anything left.
I think at the moment the answer would be no, there won't be much left. But in some way that makes its transition a bit easier, because the country does not have a complex economic system like many countries have nowadays. So in that sense, the transition over the coming months or a couple of years or so mean that the first thing they need to do is start producing oil again, which is obviously very important, so they can start getting revenues into the government. That is important because one big aspect of Libya under Gaddafi was that many Libyans have not actually felt the benefits of these enormous oil revenues over the past 4 decades. So the first thing is getting money into the government so it can start to make Libyans feel the benefits of having this fantastic resource, and then move into the transition into a more modern economy. So it starts from a really low point, which means that unlike, say, in places like Eastern Europe when communism collapsed, they had to dismantle an entire institutional infrastructure, an entire economy, and start into a capitalist or a free economy. Whereas in Libya, you don't have that. So you may not get this pain of decades of, or say 10 years or 5 years of very poor economic performance until you start to do better when the institutions are in place. So what I'm saying is that Libya starts from a low point. It has a fantastic natural resource, and it also has no debt. So it has to tackle, obviously, its security situation and make people feel a bit better about the end of Gaddafi's regime.
What about a world beyond oil? Does it not need to diversify as well? You've described Libya as a simple economy in that the oil is there, it forms the backbone, but anything can happen, as we see, and it would really need to have something else to fall back on, surely.
Yes, absolutely. It will need to do that, but it has the time to start building on the fact that it has a very good natural resource, and it needs to open up its private sector. If you think back at the Gaddafi regime, there was a private sector existing, but it was entirely aligned to people around Gaddafi. Now you have an opportunity for Libyans to actually start building their own economy, to start diversifying. Of course, they will need to diversify into other sectors, but that will come if there is an institutional framework in place that allows that, or a regulatory framework, or a legal framework.
And what about foreign investment side? Is it the likes of the United States and France at the front of the queue because they spent quite a bit of money on the actual battle, or is it someplace like Qatar, which put a lot of money into Benghazi from the outset, aid and oil assistance, and perhaps just gave itself a bit of a, would you call it a first mover advantage in doing that so early on?
Well, all of these people have a stake in Libya. If you think again about Libya under Gaddafi, it was very isolated from the rest of the Arab world, whereas the likes of, say, Jordan or Tunisia or Morocco have benefited from the oil revenues in the Gulf through foreign investment, through the sovereign wealth funds, or through business community. Libya has not seen any of that. The majority of foreign investment has been in the oil industry through the multinationals, and also in some construction over the past 5 years. So bringing Libya back into the Arab world would hopefully allow it to benefit from what has been achieved, or the revenues that are in the Gulf and other places, and opening it up to benefit from some kind of trade relations. I mean, there are lots of issues within that in the Arab world, of course. But it's been essentially just looking into Africa under Gaddafi and supporting really ridiculous adventures into Africa, and not really looking at Libya. So now you get a period where it has to rebuild, and it has the money to do so. It will open up to the other Arab countries, and it will open up to the West more. And that means that it has a good chance to actually perform quite well.
So just one last little word, if you wouldn't mind, seeing as you are a Middle East analyst, on the country many see as the next in the crosshairs, and that is, of course, Syria. Now, there is talk of billions of dollars being moved out of the country as all this fighting goes on and the unsettled conditions continue. What do you know about that, and any sort of threat that would actually pose to the rule of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria?
I think it's very difficult to actually know how much money is leaving, because I would presume a lot of it is not leaving through the proper financial channels or through the banking system, and partly because there are actually controls over capital flows in Syria at the moment to prevent a collapse in the currency. So how much money is leaving, it's anybody's guess, really. I wouldn't like to speculate on that. But I would say more than how much money is leaving is really in terms of how the other Arab countries are going to deal with Syria. And we're seeing movement on that front to try to pressure the President Assad to actually stop the killings and stop the military attacks on civilians. So what I see is the pressure is going to come more from its neighbors than how much money is leaving the country, because I think it will be very difficult to actually estimate how much money is going through into Lebanon or into Jordan or anywhere else, for that matter.
Saeed Hirsch talking the future of Libya and their Syria as well with us here on Counting the Cost. Thank you.
Thank you.
And still ahead this week on Counting the Cost, Steve Jobs. Just one man, but what will his resignation mean for the future of Apple, the company he created and took to the top of the technology tree? We turn our attention now, though, to something which covers more of the earth than anything else: water. It is essential, and yes, we take it for granted, especially when you think of how drought, climate change, population growth, corruption are all combining to put stress on our limited water resources. Have a look at this first, the big watery picture, starting with a total volume of water on Earth, about 1.4 billion square kilometres. The total volume of freshwater resources is much less, of course, around 35 million square kilometres, or 2.5% of the total volume. And the total usable freshwater supply is about 200,000 square kilometres, or less than 1% of the world's fresh stuff. So you get the picture here. There's lots of water, but not much of it to actually go round. How is it used? Well, 70% goes on agriculture, 22% for industry, and only about 8% to domestic use. And the top users stack up like this: India, China and the United States at the top, then Pakistan, Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, Mexico and the Russian Federation rounding out that top 10. Finally, some interesting stuff about how much water each of us uses, indirectly or indirectly. Now, while the daily drinking water requirement per person is 2 to 4 litres, it actually takes 2,000 to 5,000 litres to produce one person's daily food. For example, 1,000 to 3,000 to produce just a kilo of rice, and 13,000 to 15,000 litres to produce 1 kilo of grain-fed beef. So what to do about all this? How to better use what we've got and help those who don't have enough? Well, the United Nations Millennium Development Goal is to take the number of people without access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation and halve it by 2015. To reach that goal, the developing countries concerned will have to spend $42 billion on water supply and $142 billion on sanitation. The cost of maintaining existing services, that totals $322 billion for water supply, $216 billion for sanitation, which is all obviously a lot of money, but there are benefits. The UN's calculated for every $1 invested in improving water supply and sanitation, the world gets up to $34 back in benefits, with the total economic benefit from hitting those UN Millennium Goals at around $84 billion every year. So the story seems to be a little bit of investment right now can be hugely beneficial for the future. Let's talk more about that with Jakob Granit. He is the Program Director at the Stockholm International Water Institute, where they're marking World Water Week. Jakob, thank you for your time. Are we paying enough attention to water? It's all around us. We assume it will always be there, but maybe we don't think about conserving it and planning for the future enough.
Yeah, I think that today it seems like water resources are getting much more attention than previously, because we start to see a strong connection between water and economic growth and support of livelihoods and maintaining our ecosystem services. So I think there's a change, a trend change, that water is getting more attention than, say, for the last 10 years.
We were just looking at some of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals there, and they're very ambitious ideas and they're very good ideas for improving access to water. But they're going to take a lot of work, aren't they? Especially if the UN wants to get this done in its goal time, which is 2015, only 4 years away.
Yes, it will, and that of course relates to the water supply and sanitation issue, where there are still gaps and society at large is behind in many areas of the world to meeting those targets. And this is a complicated issue, of course, and relates very much to financing these water supply and sanitation schemes and finding the right type of regulations and governance in many cases in states that are perhaps weak in that context. So it is indeed a tremendous challenge to reach those targets, but at the same time there are also some promising signs that a couple of countries now are moving very much in the right direction, but still much more to do in terms of supply and sanitation.
Can you give me some examples of those countries? Because, you know, looking at the numbers for the developing world, the billions of dollars they would have to spend, and I'm going to make a grand assumption here that a lot of those countries don't have those billions of dollars spare. So who is managing to make a difference with the money they have got?
From a country perspective there, we will see great progress, for example, in Tanzania and in Kenya and in East Africa. And of course, countries that have moved out from political change, like in South Africa, that we see great progress and almost full coverage of water sanitation. But of course, then we have these fragile states that are in many cases in a very weak situation where conflict is prevailing. So those countries are falling behind. And also, of course, on the positive side, the changes in Asia, East and Southern Asia, have seen a lot of progress and the coverage now being more and more met. But I think one should also relate this back to the water resource management aspect itself. This is not only about supporting supply and sanitation, it's actually to manage the water that then will be provided for supply and sanitation, as well as for agriculture use or energy use or for our ecosystem services. And in that context, it seems like we are in many cases not doing so well, and not also in developing regions, but even in the developed world.
And is it kind of like the climate change argument, where this developed world that you just spoke about is asked to take on a greater responsibility? You know, it may not have the greatest numbers in terms of population, but it's got the big companies and the industries which are growing the most and using more and more water. Ergo, do they bear more responsibility and thus open up a whole other big argument about who pays?
Well, I think personally that everybody bears responsibility for maintaining our water resources and also to finding arguments and supporting the supply and sanitation problem. So indeed, we need to find better mechanisms to do that. And as I mentioned again, we also need to realize that finding these financing systems that are sustainable in the long run, and perhaps not always replicating technologies and trends that we have perhaps in the more developed parts of the world. So looking into innovation in this sector will be very, very important. And finding technologies that are attractive to consumers that perhaps not have the same ability to pay for these services. And in that area, I think we are also perhaps way behind. But the promising thing is that we are seeing different type of companies in the ICT technology sector, for example, looking at how one can raise awareness on these, spreading good technology advice. Some that are here even at the World Water Week and demonstrating that. So there are these promising signs when we now realize how closely water issues are related to health and the economy and in general our sustainable livelihoods.
Final question for you, Jakob, and it's one about a specific statistic that we've got from the United Nations. And to be honest, I'm kind of struggling to believe it or understand it. The one that says for every dollar invested in water infrastructure, the world can get up to $34 back in benefits. How does that work, and shouldn't that mean that there should be much more money knocking around to actually put back into water infrastructure?
Yeah, I agree with you. There should be more resources put into this field, and what these calculations are based on is of course the multiplier effects into the economy. So if you look at work days saved from better health, then that will translate into more money earned also for households at the household level, which then spread into better education and for other goods and services in the economy. So it's all based on these multiplier effects. And that's the realization that water has a value in terms of its resource aspects in the broader natural environment, but then as it translates into the economy, and not only health then, but also as an input to different goods and services. You can include the food sector, of course, the beverage sector, and even higher level secondary services like consultancy support, which relate in many cases perhaps to hydropower development. So these are the multipliers one are looking at to come up to those numbers.
Jakob Granit, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for making the time for us this week here on Counting the Cost.
Thank you so much.
The thing is, all this water talk isn't just about protecting drinking water or providing sanitation. It's about the whole water ecosystem and how what we do impacts that. Let's give you a case study here. East Timor, where the construction of a power plant to supply residents with electricity, obviously something very much necessary. is damaging the country's underwater ecosystem, particularly the fragile coral reefs. Andrew Thomas went to explore for himself in the remote district of Bahau in East Timor.
This reef is among the world's best. Fish and brightly coloured coral in abundance. Armed conflict onshore, understandably bad for East Timor's people and economy, was good for the country's underwater world. Stunted development meant no heavy industries polluting its seas, nor hordes of tourists kicking coral or stealing shell souvenirs. All of which makes its waters the ideal place to study the effects on reefs now that development is coming.
The country's in a bit of a delicate balance now where they're weighing up development over their natural resources, and there is some concern with every development that it's often at the expense of the environment.
This new power plant is one reason for the concern. East Timor's government has promised electricity to all provinces by the end of this year. To get the parts needed for the plant in by sea, the Chinese developers have brought in a floating wharf right alongside the reef.
This is the thin edge of the wedge in terms of environmental damage for what is the single biggest gold mine for a future sustainable industry in this country, which is tourism.
I haven't seen any evidence that just bringing this heavy machine affect the corals. It might, but you can also repair. You can grow back the corals where they have been affected.
Alongside an annual sea life survey, marine biologists are looking at the effects the new barge is having. The immediate impact not too worrying, but there's a wider concern.
As a single development, this here has almost negligible, or it is negligible, impacts on the reef. I guess the larger concern then is that because the reefs here aren't so extensive, they're actually quite narrow, shallow reefs, that if we have so many small developments that it could eventually be, death by 1,000 cuts for these reefs, and it'd be a gradual degradation over time instead of a massive hit at one site.
So far, East Timor's reefs have held up well. There's no evidence that this development or any other have caused any permanent damage to them. But marine biologists will be watching these seas carefully. They are the perfect laboratory in which to study what happens when rapid development comes.
Finally this week, some news which is somehow totally unexpected and predictable at the same time. We're talking the resignation of Apple CEO Steve Jobs. Unexpected because, well, he's Steve Jobs, the man who founded and later resurrected Apple into one of the world's most powerful brands. But predictable because he's been ill for a while and succession has had to be talked about. Rob Reynolds with more now from California.
Our collective efforts.
College dropout Steve Jobs co-founded his company in a California garage and turned it into an industry giant.
A lot of us have been working for...
Jobs has been in poor health for several years. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2004 and received a liver transplant 2 years ago. In recent public appearances, he has looked thin and drawn. The visionary leader of Apple Computer did as much as any single person to create and shape the digital age. Apple's Mac made computing fun for the masses, popularizing technology like the touchscreen and the mouse. Artists, video makers, and designers preferred Apple's software over the more plodding PC brands. With the iPod and iTunes, Jobs revolutionized the way people buy and listen to music. The iPhone, with its multitude of apps, dominates the smartphone market. And the iPad may someday make laptop computers obsolete. Jobs took a leave of absence in January to focus on his health. In a brief letter to Apple's board of directors on Wednesday, he said, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." Jobs, who will stay on as Apple's chairman, will be replaced by Chief Operating Officer Tim Cook. Apple shares closed higher on Tuesday, but then fell 5% in after-hours trading.
And that is where we'll leave you for this week. But if you want to get in touch with the show, here's how you do it. Either send a tweet to me at KamalAJE or the show's editor, Abid Oliver Ali, all one word. And of course, feel free to follow us for updates on the show. And if you're not on Twitter, just drop us an email. The address is countingthecost@aljazeera.net. And while you're online, head to aljazeera.net/English and hit the business tab at the top to link on to the Counting the Cost page, where you can catch up with any of our past episodes in full whenever you want. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.